Uh, Good morning, everyone. I am so pleased to see so many of you today. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Sally Munger, and I'm a member of the forums team at UUCD. We have a great team of folks who did lots of hard work today, and so we're ready to go right at 9:30. I want to welcome everyone to today's forum entitled The ERA Forward to Fruition. Our speaker today is the Honorable, oh, I guess she's hiding behind me here, the Honorable Betty Folliard. Wow. Who is a three-term legislator and the founder of ERA Minnesota. I think it's fair to say that no one in the state is more knowledgeable about the ERA than Betty is. So I feel honored to have her here and grateful she was willing to come up to Duluth to share her knowledge. I want to especially welcome members of the League of Women Voters of Duluth who agreed to co-sponsor today's forum, and also members of the American Association of University Women. Betty asked that you folks be invited, and I'm glad you turned out in good numbers. Also, Senator McEwen and Representative Kozlowski will be joining us if they aren't here already. I don't know. Just a little housekeeping for folks who haven't been here before. These forums go until 10:20. So Betty will speak about 30 minutes and then we'll take questions during the remaining time. Our service starts at 10:30, so we need to be finished up by 10:20 so that folks can get into the service in a timely way. As you note here, we have pretend walls. So if you want to continue chatting after 10:20, please do it quietly. Welcome, welcome to all. And now, without further ado, I'll turn it over to Betty. Thank you.
And I'll take the mic. Oh. Thank you, everybody, for having me today. Thank you to this congregation. A big thank you to Sally and Will Munger, who just are fabulous hosts for me, fabulous. And thank you, Brett Cease, for setting me up and getting me right here. This is a bit of a science experiment for me because I haven't done the PowerPoint presentation for a long time, but I thought a visual would help because there are a lot of really wonderful pieces of information here. And because everybody starts at the ERA at a different place, like there are those in the audience who say, what's the ERA? Is that earned run average, or is that a detergent? What is it? You know, and if some of you recall, the year that the ERA became passed through Congress in 1972 was the year that ERA laundry detergent was made. I mean, talk about, you know, taking from a good thing. So that's a truism. So now let me begin with a little introduction. I'm Betty Folliard, founder of ERA Minnesota. Okay, we're done with that. And I want to let you know what we're going to be talking about today. Hopefully, if it moves forward. No. it's already it's already funky.
Yeah, you can do that.
Let's see. There it is. Okay, excuse me. What is the Equal Rights Amendment? We'll talk about that. A brief history of the Equal Rights Amendment, and it'll be very brief because a lot of you know it, but some of you don't. And then we'll talk about why we need it, and arguments for and against it, and why now. And then at the end, we'll talk about next steps, which means take action, okay? So we begin with a little slide that just kind of is an overview of it, that this is the US Supreme Court. There's justice at the top, and it says equal justice under the law, except for women, okay? We're gonna talk about that. So what is the Equal Rights Amendment? The now fully ratified Federal Equal Rights Amendment is 24 words. Equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by any state or by the United States or any state on account of sex. I'll say it again, and I'm going to do this in parts. So I want you to say it with me. Equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. Pretty easy, right?
Yes.
Yeah, it's only taken 100 years. And we now have a state proposed ERA, which I can say in this state, there has been a proposed state ERA now for 40 years. Since 1983, that's when state ERAs started getting proposed in Minnesota, and every year since that. But this year, we have introduced an expanded, inclusive, multi-generational, intersectional ERA. It is not your grandma's ERA, okay? And there's a reason for that. And the reason is because when we look at the word equality, there aren't any qualifiers. There are no qualifiers in equality. That all means all and equal means equal. And so we're going to not have any more carve-outs. Who do we leave behind the door? You know, the first wave of feminism left African-American women behind the door. They said, we have to go first. The second wave left lesbians behind the door. They said, wait. We don't want to hear your issues yet. We just want to get women in the door, right? That's what they said. And the third wave of feminism, which I believe we are in, some would argue it's the fourth, but I would say that since Anita Hill, that was the beginning of the third wave of feminism, and we haven't accomplished our next point yet, that the third wave of feminism is inclusive, and all means all, and that's the end of it. So the language that we have now for our proposed Minnesota State ERA that was introduced this year in the Minnesota House and Senate, and it passed through the Senate 43-23 on a wildly bipartisan vote, wildly bipartisan, is equality under the law shall not be abridged or denied in this state, by this state or any of its cities, counties, or other political subdivisions on account of race, color, creed, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, age, disability, ancestry, or country of origin. That is the all-inclusive proposed Equal Rights Amendment for the state of Minnesota. Okay, moving on, brief history of the ERA. And I'm gonna go kind of quickly through this because we have a lot to talk about. And if I get to the next slide, you can do it. Okay. I think I went 2 there, just a second. Oh yes, 1787, the founders. You remember Abigail Adams, who said to John as he was going out the door, don't forget the ladies, remember the ladies, right? Ah, shoot, he forgot them. And so the men put it together and they left out a lot of people behind the door, right? You go forward to 1848, and many of you know about the first Women's Rights Convention that happened in 1848 in Seneca Falls, New York. What I didn't know is that they actually, from the beginning of thinking it up, and then actually doing it, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, et cetera, they took 9 days and they got like 400 people there. And now they're coming by horse and buggy. I was amazed that they only had 9 days to plan it. But they put it together and they put together the Declaration of Sentiments. They got 68 women and 32 men to sign on. And Frederick Douglass was one of the men who was there. And it declared women and men are equal and that we should have the same rights across the board. And then they began focusing on voting rights, right? And so they figure, well, if women get the vote, we'll have equality. But it didn't quite work out that way That took another 50 years, right? Until they got it. In the meantime, the 14th Amendment came along. And as you will recall, the suffragists began as abolitionists. And so the abolitionists kind of evolved into suffragists. And two very good friends on this photo here, on these photos here, Susan B. Anthony and Frederick Douglass. If you ever go to Rochester, New York, and you go to the Susan B. Anthony house, right in front is a park. And there's this beautiful statue of Susan B. Anthony and Frederick Douglass sitting at a table, it's life-size statue, drinking tea and chatting, because every time Frederick Douglass came to Rochester to speak or do anything, he would always stay at Susan B. Anthony's house. But they had a little bit of a rift when it came to the 14th Amendment. And things got a little ugly there for a while, because women were saying, we need to be in the 14th Amendment. You need to add the word sex. And there was that moment of a clash where Frederick Douglass said, this is the Negro hour, it's not the women's hour. And all of a sudden, whoosh, everybody got mad. And that was a bit of a rift for a time. And African-American men were given rights by the 14th Amendment. That's the year that the word male was inserted into the US Constitution. So another long struggle, 50 years go by, and there's lots of suffrage marches, right? And finally, women win the vote for some women, right? It wasn't inclusive yet. There was still the Jim Crow laws that kept a lot of women from the ballot. But they won that, and then they went, wait, that didn't give us equality. So 1923, you'll see in here Alice Paul and Crystal Eastman with some other women. It was Alice Paul and Crystal Eastman who wrote the first ERA. They wrote it in 1921. They introduced it in the First Presbyterian Church of Seneca Falls in 1923, on July 21st, 1923. And it was actually earlier language than what's on there. It was called the Lucretia Mott Amendment at that time. And then we marched for another 50 years, right? 50 years it was introduced, and some of you might know this, it was introduced in Congress by Susan B. Anthony's nephew, Daniel Reed Anthony Jr. was a congressman, and he introduced it in 1923 into Congress. So you see that continuum, that great line there of suffragists, abolitionist suffragists into ERA activists to try to push us to a more just society. And then, more marching. So here we are. The federal ERA was approved by Congress and sent to the states for ratification in 1972. And it was approved overwhelmingly by Congress. I mean, it was a strong vote, but it was given 7 years to pass. You'll recall that. And it was put a deadline, a time limit was put in the proposing clause of the bill. So when I say that, you've got the preamble and then you've got the bill. Keep in mind that the language of the bill, that 24 words, equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or any state on account of sex, that was what passed through 35 states, not the preamble. But it got 35 states pretty quickly, and then they extended the time 3 years, but we only got to 35 states because of the pushback. And so here we have a picture of Jimmy Carter, who signed the ERA. He didn't have to sign the ERA. In fact, governors and presidents don't really sign resolutions. They don't sign amendments, but he wanted to touch it, so he signed it. And the same thing happened this year with our resolution to Congress that Governor Walz signed our resolution. I thought it was very funny. Ooh, they like to touch it. So 1982 was the year that the Stop ERA, Phyllis Schlafly, blah, 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 made it go dormant. And it fell short of the 38 states that it needed because of the arbitrary time limit that was imposed upon it. So that was then, right? And in the meantime, starting in 1997, from a Congressional Research Service in Washington, D.C. did a study that looked at the ERA and looked at the Constitution and said, well, the ERA, welcome, Mayor Larson, welcome. I'm thrilled to have you here. Thank you for coming. Thank you for coming. Okay, so I just lost my train of thought, but why do we still need it? Okay, so I mean, I've given you kind of the history along the way, but let's kind of do a deep dive right now of why is it still relevant. Oh yes, the Congressional Research, the CRS study that was done in 1997, that was important because it said that the time limit is unconstitutional because it's it wasn't in the body of the text that passed through 35 states. And it said that the rescissions of 5 states was unconstitutional because there's nothing in the Constitution that allows for rescissions. Okay, so the 2 reasons why the Equal Rights Amendment supposedly failed, because people will tell you, oh, the ERA is dead, the ERA is dead. ERA didn't die. Those 2 things are unconstitutional. And our internationally known constitutional experts stand behind that, and they've argued it. And so we're fighting this on multiple levels. That's federal level, because remember, we've got the federal and the state. Okay, why do we still need it? Gender pay gap, sexual harassment and sex discrimination in the workplace, sexual violence, unequal access to health care. The COVID pandemic set women's labor force back 30 years. Overturning Roe v. Wade in the 2022 Dobbs versus Jackson Supreme Court case on abortion rights was the first time for a rescission of rights in this country since the 1800s, okay? There's reason why we do this. So the gender pay gap, the gender pay gap in Minnesota, women make on average 81 cents to a man's dollar, with much, much higher, larger inequities for Black, Indigenous, Latina, Asian women, and women of color. Because 2/3 of minimum wage workers and tipped workers are women. The rate of US senators who live in poverty is 2/3 higher for women than men. Unequal pay and workforce sexual harassment are strongly linked. Sexual harassment, women make up half the workforce. Over 50% of young people ages 18 to 34 experience sexual harassment in the workforce. In 46% of 2-parent families, both parents work. In one in 4 women will be raped or sexually assaulted in their lifetime, and less than 1% of rapes lead to felony convictions. So sexual violence nationwide, 81% of women and 43% of men have reported experienced some form of sexual harassment and or sexual assault in their lifetime. Violence Against Women Act was finally renewed, and it is a federal law to protect women from sexual violence, but the funding comes and goes for that all the time. And I'm going to go further on here. Equal access to healthcare, that's important. And you know, it comes into this because when you look at maternal health and a whole lot of other pieces, we don't have equal access. This year, some bills like the 24-hour waiting period on abortion were removed, but it's a law and laws can be overturned again. So that was a law that was put in 20 years ago. It could be gone in another 10 years. We don't know. So arguments for and against the Equal Rights Amendment. How am I doing? We're going to rush through this. The principle, you know, it's a principle, not a party, that the ERA is nonpartisan. It was introduced first by a Republican. It was and I mentioned Daniel Reed Anthony Jr., the nephew of Susan B. Anthony. It was supported by every Republican president and first lady up to Reagan. And it wasn't added, it was actually added to the Republican platform before it was added to the Democratic platform. It was removed in 1980 from the Republican platform. It was removed from the Democratic platform in 2005, and we had to fight to get it back on there in 2011. So argument number one against the ERA, well, the 14th Amendment Equal Protection Clause includes protections against sex discrimination. Only it doesn't. It doesn't. There's a quote. See if this will move forward for me. You can do it. Yeah. Antonin Scalia, Justice Scalia, who's now no longer with us, once said, certainly the Constitution does not require discrimination on the basis of sex. The only issue is whether it prohibits it. It doesn't. That's Antonin Scalia, a conservative justice on the US Supreme Court, okay? And Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg said, if I could choose an amendment to add to the Constitution, it would be the Equal Rights Amendment. I would like my granddaughters, when they pick up the Constitution, to see that notion that women and men are persons of equal stature, and I'd like them to see that as a basic principle of our society. So argument again, we have plenty of laws to protect us. Laws are only as strong as the constitutional language behind them. And they can be unenforced or changed or repealed. And this is important. An ERA would give the same scrutiny to sex discrimination in the Constitution as it gives to race, religion, and national origin. So the way I describe it is that laws are fickle. They come and go with the prevailing winds. So, you know, if the political winds blow to the conservative side, all of a sudden these laws get swept in and other laws get thrown out. And if we saw what happened this year with our trifecta, laws got swept out and new laws came in. And so laws can be changed. The Constitution won't be changed. So argument number 3 is ERA could expand abortion rights. Now that really offends some people, but 27 states currently have an ERA in their state constitution. And ERAs have never expanded abortion access, but they've protected abortion access. If you have those laws in place, they protect them, and they've protected them in several states, including, what am I thinking? I'm thinking New Mexico, Pennsylvania, right now, various places. I can't even name them, Connecticut. And right now in Nevada, they're protecting trans rights. So this is important stuff. ERAs protect existing rights, and some states are currently adding reproductive rights explicitly in their constitution. We'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. Come on, you want to go forward? There, oops, one more. I have one more argument that, women will be forced into the military and put into combat positions. Now, currently women make up 16% of the US military, and they're in combat. And, you know, it's the same thing that we heard in the 70s, you know, that, oh, it's going to expand unisex bathrooms. Oh my God. Gay marriage. Oh my God. You know, women in the military. Oh dear. And all these things happened without the Equal Rights Amendment. The Equal Rights Amendment has gotten blamed for a lot of things. And right now, I can tell you in 2024, abortion is on the ballot and trans rights are on the ballot. If you're a trans person in this state or this country, you're feeling the heat right now, particularly in the state for all of the wonderful things that we passed this year. And so they are in the eye of the target, but they don't have the protections in our Constitution, as women don't have the protections in our Constitution, as LGBTQIA people do not have. And so why the ERA now? Well, easily. Oh, okay, this is a snapshot from then. Okay, this is 1923, the day of the Equal Rights Amendment was signed in outside of the Presbyterian Church in Seneca Falls, New York. 100 years later on the day, this is us now. And this was us at the ERA convention in Seneca Falls, the 100th anniversary of the Equal Rights Amendment on July 21st. I'm right over here. I'm right here, somewhere in here. And there were 60% of the people at this convention were young people. 60%. It was multi-generational. It was intersectional. It was inclusive. And that's the way the Equal Rights Amendment has to be. So this is a quick snapshot of ERA across the states. The pink is all that had ratified by 1982. The yellow are the 3 states that ratified in the last 5 years. That was first Nevada, then Illinois, then Virginia. That got us to 38 states. I was there in Virginia on the day that they passed it, and danced and got on the New York Times and NBC, and it was really fun. And so theoretically, 2 years beyond that was the date that it should have been enacted. So 2022, and we are saying that when you have a fully ratified constitutional amendment that has achieved all the constitutional requirements, then the president should tell the U.S. archivist to pick up the phone. He should pick up the phone and tell the U.S. archivist to certify it. The United States is out of step with the world. A lot of you know about CEDAW, the Convention for the Eradication of Discrimination Against Women, all forms of discrimination against women. There are 187 states that have passed this UN resolution. Only 7 states haven't, and they are Sudan, South Sudan, Iran, 2 little tiny nations of Tonga, Palau, who did I forget? Somalia, and the United States of America. Yeah, so here we are, ERAs at the state level. I told you there are 27 of them. It shows the states in the light blue that are working on it. We are working towards getting our state ERA. And the new Minnesota state ERA that is on race, color, creed, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, expression, age, disability, ancestry, and national origin. The Not Your Grandma's ERA. It basically will constitutionalize our Human Rights Act. So basically all of that is in law, but again, that law can be overturned. So how about we just constitutionalize it? Let's put it there, because laws are fickle and they can be changed. Why we still need the state ERA is to ensure that rights won't be rescinded by future legislatures, to state explicitly that Minnesota's state constitution protects equal legal rights for all, and to make clear that in Minnesota, discrimination is prohibited. So next steps, this is the next steps, take action, and then I'm going to turn it to questions, okay? What you need to do, you know what we do, you know, ERA, we're working away, but what you can do is to talk to your legislators, call your legislators, write your legislators, email your legislators, and say that we want ERA in 2024, okay? ERA in 24, that's the message. So we did have a big success this year because our resolution to Congress, telling Congress to enact the 28th Amendment to the US Constitution passed this year. That was big, that was big, that was very big. That took us 8 years to do. I wrote the first one, and this year, 6 other states passed a resolution, a similar resolution. We've been working on this and amplifying it across the United States. And so we had big success on that. So our ballot initiative bill is SF 37. And as I mentioned, passed 43 to 23 through the Senate. But now the legislators need to hear from you because there are going to be some changes as we go forward. It's going to evolve because it was stopped on the last day in the House. And so we're working with our partners to make sure that in February of 2024, it gets through the last body, and then we will get it on the ballot. It is a ballot initiative. So what you can do, become a member of ERA Minnesota at eramn.org. That way you'll receive our e-news and you can donate, you can get activated and volunteer. You can advocate for the ERA. It's very important that right now these conversations start happening around the dinner table and around among your friends and your networks. You need to be raising the ERA and talking about it. And you've got all the information at your fingertips. There are various Equal Rights Amendment websites, including eramn.org, that you can get information from. Contact your legislators. I keep saying that. Because legislators are right now the gatekeepers. And they're the ones who have the capability, the power, and the opportunity to finally get this done. We have a trifecta. Don't waste it. Don't waste it. So thank you, everybody. We're on the right side of history. We won't take no for an answer, and we will prevail. Thank you.